And can I also thank Diane and Leon for your incredible welcome to country? And can I also acknowledge the Yarruru people, the traditional owners of the land? Again, thank you very much for the invitation. Thanks to News Corp and Hancock for again hosting this year's Bush Summit. Last year it was in the Pilbara, this year in the Kimberley. It is a really interesting time to be addressing a Bush Summit and a summit to talk about the economic and social opportunities for regional Western Australia. As we gather here today to celebrate and advocate for regional WA, on the other side of the country, an economic roundtable is being held to discuss economic opportunities and how we can continue to grow the economic momentum in this nation. The roundtable is a timely temperature check to make sure that we have our settings right to continue to grow our economy. And in particular, when we talk about economic growth in WA, we basically talk about regional economic growth. So much of our economy, so much of the growth, so many of the jobs and opportunities that are created in this great state come from regional WA. And we acknowledge the enormous challenges that does bring with it, but also the fact that regional WA is very much a part of constantly a part of the national economic agenda and also the national economic discourse. So as I said, while we have been growing steadily, there's always challenges ahead. And we have seen sustained economic growth in our state. Since 2019, the WA economy has grown by almost 26% compared to a national figure of 16%. As you all know, we account for half of the nation's exports. And of course, those exports come from our regional ports. Business investment has been growing steadily by 42%. And of course, as we know, the labour market has been growing. And as a result, we've seen significant employment or labour shortages across the state. So our economy has been growing, and as I said, in particular in regional WA, creating challenges across the field, in particular in housing and in service delivery. Our focus, and my focus as Treasurer, but also as Deputy Premier and Minister for Transport, is to make sure we can continue that economic growth, because that means opportunities for regional Western Australians. So while the world is challenging and we're seeing changes in capital flows across the world, changing in commodity prices, we need to constantly evolve and move to make sure we have the policy settings right to continue to attract that private sector investment, to continue to attract new developments that create opportunities. And I've got to say, across the state, we've seen many of our resource companies, many of our companies operating in regional WA continually involved in making sure they can deliver local benefits, and that's something we're very keen to partner with. As I said, we are and will continue to support the resources and other regional sectors, in particular agriculture. And what we always say is in relation to how we continue to evolve is that we've seen incredible advancement across these key industries in WA. Technology, innovation, across the agriculture, across the resource sector. I always point out that WA is at leading the world in relation to much of the technology and advancement in these industries. And so one of the key challenges is to make sure we can continue to reform and to be more efficient to ensure that we can continually compete across the global marketplace. As I said, there are enormous opportunities for Western Australia in the future. Opportunities to support the global move to alternative energy. Opportunities to discover and develop new deposits to feed into the global supply chain, and opportunities to further refine and process our resources right here. As Minister for Transport too, I've been very much involved in the agricultural sector, in particular in moving grain and freight around the wheat belt, and how we need to continually make sure we have the best rail network to move our freight efficiently. So as I said, we're working with industry across the board, and I'll talk about two key features today. One of them is approvals reform, and noting that we need to continually support the attraction of private sector investment. We've undertaken a lot of reform on the approvals process. I was Minister for Planning when we started the reform of the planning process, and that has been carried on by our Minister for Planning now, John Kerry. That means a more streamlined approvals process to support new housing and commercial developments. Of course, we're working with the federal government and hoping again to support more streamlining and removing duplication of the approvals process. Again, making sure we can support investment across the state in our regions to make sure we get more timely investment in new projects. We've created a new Coordinator General to support projects of state significance, and again, as part of the economic roundtable that's happening currently over East, we want to see how we can work with the Commonwealth to remove duplication and have a far more streamlined approvals process. Now, another key feature, and something that was mentioned quite a bit in the promotion, is the need to deliver economic and social infrastructure through regional WA. We know that a state as big as WA, the ability to move people, to move freight across the state, the ability to connect into energy systems, to the ability to source water, all of these are key fundamentals to how we can grow as a society. And of course, the other challenges, our challenge on housing, and we understand the economic challenge, the construction challenge of housing in WA, and we saw that actually as a feature across the nation. And so we've been working with councils, and we continue to work with councils on how we can have more land available for housing, and how as a government we can support infrastructure and headworks costs to support new housing. And we've got a particular fund that we're rolling out, which is about enabling housing through a housing headworks fund. So we know the housing continues to be a major challenge.